All right, good Wednesday spring evening to y'all out there. Hope y'all doing all right. Gorgeous day. It started out with ice and heat this morning and quickly turned to air conditioning later today, so it's one of them. But good to see you tonight. Let me mention just a couple of things. Don't forget this Sunday morning, we take it up a love offering for Chad Beeson, and Kevin Harris's Sunday school class is sponsoring that. Also, don't forget about during the month, I know many made a trip over to Eddie's Hot Dogs yesterday. So thank y'all for doing that. And don't forget, all month on Tuesdays, that'll all benefit Timmy. So that's awesome. A few other things there that you can take note of. Let me see. The F5 group will be meeting in the morning at 10, and been having a really great turnout for that. So way to go, ladies. Our Costa Rica team will have a meeting right after service, morning service this Sunday, and go through a few things. And then also don't forget about the Cherokee County Revival. Let me thank you. We had a few go out on Monday and over the south side, and I appreciate that. You really were an encouragement to me, and I appreciate you being there. This coming Monday and Tuesday at White Plains Baptist with Dr. Don Wilton will be preaching. And then the next Monday and Tuesday services will be here, again, starting at 6:30. So I hope you can plan on being a part of those if possible. They actually go through the next, I think it's Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. No, that's not right, is it? I don't know. Anyway, check the calendars on the table. It's that next week as well. And so keep those things in mind. All right. Well, we finished up last week with our story of the life of Gideon and studied through that. And I've been thinking and praying about where to go, and I didn't go far. We're going to go back to Judges, okay? And talk about a guy, really a couple, that have a miracle baby who possessed some great strength. You could say in a way that this couple was going to be the parents of Superman, right? You really could if you think about it. But if you remember this story, the slogan about Superman, faster than a locomotive, more powerful than a speeding bullet, able to leap tall buildings in a single bound. Look up in the air. It's a bird, it's a plane. No, it's Superman. Visitor from a strange planet endowed with powers and abilities beyond those of mortal men. Superman who disguised. I wonder who came up with that clever disguise between him and Batman. No, anyway, that's another story. But disguised as Clark Kent, mild-mannered reporter for the Daily Planet, wages a never-ending battle for truth, justice, and the American way. All right, this Wednesday night crowd, who would be considered the first actor, roughly, anyway, there's a little debate, but the first actor that was the original Superman? Reeves? But it was George, wasn't it? George. Yeah, Christopher was like the son that picked up later. And many consider George the first to play him on TV. I read this. I didn't know this. This is pretty interesting. His fame, Mr. George Reeves, was not without some risk. Listen to this. Every time he donned his Superman suit in public, there were people who would kick him in the shins, hit him in the back with their fist, and basically assault him. His young admirers didn't really mean any harm. They were just eager to prove how strong the Man of Steel truly was. One afternoon in Detroit in 1953, Reeves' costume nearly cost him his life. He was making an appearance at a department store, and a young fan pulled out his father's loaded .45 caliber Army Colt and pointed it straight at his chest. Miraculously, Reeves talked the kid into putting it down. He assured the boy that Superman could stand the force of the shot, but, quote, when bullets bounce off my chest, they might hurt you and others around here. So the boy put it down. Isn't that amazing to think about? A life playing something like that, but people thinking about it in real life terms, how different it is. Well, Superman, of course, had his weaknesses, and we're going to see as we go through our study, which we know that Samson had a few as well. But the story is pretty fascinating. So Judges 13, not too far from where we were last time. We're going to look at just the first 5 verses tonight. And Warren Wiersbe says this about his life, Samson's life, and so forth. He says, few accounts in the Bible are as tragic as this one. And you think about that, but I want you to see how it starts. Because the start of this, and we're going to talk about this really being set apart, is really fascinating. It's just supernatural, just amazing. And so listen to verses 1 through 5 of Judges 13. Again, the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord delivered them into the hand of the Philistines for 40 years. Now there was a certain man from Zorah of the family of the Danites, whose name was Manoah, and his wife was barren and had no children. The angel of the Lord appeared to the woman and said to her, indeed, now you are barren and have borne no children, but you shall conceive and bear a son. Now therefore, please be careful not to drink wine or similar drink, and not to eat anything unclean. For behold, you shall conceive and bear a son, and no razor shall come upon his head, for the child shall be a Nazirite to God from the womb, and he shall begin to deliver Israel out of the hand of the Philistines. Pretty neat start to the story and the life of Samson. Let's look at a few things as we kind of dive in some tonight. And verse 1, based on really what we've been talking about in recent weeks, is just a thought, well, here we go again. Right? It's a constant theme of the Israelites and really much of us too in our lives. And so it begins with, again, the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord. It's a habit. It just keeps coming up. They may get on track for a while, but it's not long, and they start reverting back to their old ways. And so yet again, they did evil, wrong, wickedness, hurt, harm in the sight or the eyes of the Lord. And again, that's the only place that it matters, right? God's view is the right view. And if he says it's right, it's right. If he says it's wrong, it's wrong. And so whatever it is in his sight is right. And so we need to understand this is what we're supposed to do. They did evil. He calls it evil. He sees it as evil. That's exactly what it is. And so the Lord delivered them into the hand of the Philistines for 40 years. The idea of delivered, there's another word we'll see at the end of our text in verse 5 about delivered, but in this case, it means that he delivered in the sense he gave or put them into the hands or the power of the Philistines. So what they did, and you can go back and look at some of the things that it talks about. If you have subheadings like me at the end of chapter 12, there's a familiar name now in our country that floats around in political ranks. You'll see Elon found there, by the way, in case you're wondering. Elon's right there in the Bible. There he is. But you can see that there. And so some things had gone okay, had gone well, but of course now they've taken that turn again. And here we go. They're going down that same road. And it says they would be put into the Philistines' hands for 40 years. That's a long time. The Israelites and Philistines, it's like they were almost the arch enemies. They needed somehow, some way, it would take supernatural intervention for them to ever find any kind of common ground or to get along. But nevertheless, they're just enemies of each other. Believed differently, lived differently, acted differently. And so it's kind of interesting that's the way it's put. And it tells us again at the end of verse 5, talking about deliverance out of the hands of the Philistines. So here we go again. But then verses 2 and 3, a miracle is coming. Now think about it. What it says in verse 1, what's going on, what's happening, how long they're in bondage, all of that. But then right in the midst of that, there's a certain man from Zorah, of the family of the Danites, which of course is the tribe of Dan. Zorah is not far from Jerusalem, not far from Philistine territory, as a matter of fact. But the man's name is Manoah. Manoah's name means rest. Anybody ever wish you could have been named Rest? Wouldn't that be good? If your names matter, and of course in the Bible it does, wouldn't it be good if it was Rest? His wife was barren, had no children. We see that story quite often in the Bible. Well, we think about it quite often. If you were to type in basically how many women in the Bible are barren, you will probably get the answer of 7. In the sense of, there's one that may say 8, but 7 is what we typically think of, beginning with Sarah and then Rebecca and Rachel and Hannah. And of course here, Samson's mother. We think about Elizabeth, the mother of John the Baptist, and the Shunammite, as mentioned as well. Some would also put Michal, the daughter of Saul, who was barren from a point as well. But there's a few that are mentioned by name or referenced, in this case, Samson's mother, who were barren and had no children. That was a big thing in that day, huge thing. And it was hard for ladies, and many times it still is hard for ladies who maybe are unable to have children. But thankful for the wonderful gift of adoption, aren't we? Very grateful for that. And so we praise God for that opportunities come. But verse 3, the angel of the Lord appeared to the woman and said to her, "Indeed, now you are barren and have borne no children, but you shall conceive and bear a son." A miracle is on the way. And so the Lord delivers this message to Manoah's wife. And we're going to see the dialogue that comes in the next few weeks and what happens with that. It's pretty interesting how it comes. But the angel of the Lord appears. You could say this is the Lord himself. Many would agree that this is the Lord personally. When you see the angel of the Lord, we talked about that not too long ago. At worst, it's a supernatural representative, if nothing else, but it may well be God just taking a unique form and making a unique appearance that it comes. And so he presents himself before her. He shares a pretty amazing message that behold and see and pay attention. Yes, you're barren, but you're going to conceive and bear a son. I don't really know their ages at this point, not thinking about those sort of things, but they haven't been able to have children. And so what a message. What something to hear and believe, to just be able to cling to and hold on to, and to just think maybe after ever how long we're going to be able to have a child and we're going to have a son. And then what he tells to follow is just icing in many ways on the cake. But what we find out about Manoah and his wife, is we'll read these other verses later and talk about, is they're a believing couple. They love the Lord. They pray. They trust. All those things are in their favor. And Samson's going to be born into a godly home with godly people that believe and trust in the Lord. So he was God's special gift to them, but not only to them, also to the nation as well. And God's going to call him to be different and to be set apart. Now, if you have children, and even that initial news of maybe there's a child that's on the way, there's some things that start rolling through your minds. And then you see them, you lay your eyes on them, they're born, and you start thinking about things. You start thinking, God, what you got in store for this child? God, what's your plans? What's your purpose? Now, we might not always word it that way, but, all these things are churning in our head, because the reality, I hope, is we're all thinking, just like we do for every child, is, oh, Lord, this child will be set apart for you. This child will be different. You'll be able to use this child and do whatever you want to in this child's life. Who knows the potential? Who knows the plan and what's going on? But in their case with Samson, it's quite obvious because of the way the message is presented and so forth and so on, that a miracle is coming. But here's the thing. Don't miss the thought. Again, they've rebelled again. They've done evil again. They're going to go into the hands of the Philistines for 40 years. And then here's the message that, by the way, you're going to have a son. And he's going to be instrumental in things. Okay. how long is this going to take? I'll get that. Okay, well, assuming she conceives immediately, assuming there's 9 months of pregnancy, assuming he has a relatively normal growing up stage, he might have been a little bigger than everybody else. I don't know. His hair was longer than most of the other guys, but that's another story. This is going to take a while, right? You're thinking probably at least 18, 19 years before he's able to do what we think he's going to do. And so isn't it like the Lord? He says a miracle's coming, a miracle's going to take place. You're going to have this son. He's going to do some amazing things. But sometimes things just take a little time, don't they? The miracle is going to happen. But there's another part of that we'll see that it's just going to take a little while. So look at this other part, verses 4 and 5, and the idea of you be careful and be careful for him. It says, now therefore, please be careful not to drink wine or similar drink, not to eat anything unclean. For behold, same word for indeed in the New King James we talked about in verse 3. For behold, indeed you shall conceive and bear a son. No razor shall come upon his head, for the child shall be a Nazarite to God from the womb. And here's the phrase at the end, and he shall begin to deliver Israel out of the hand of the Philistines. It's not going to happen overnight. He's going to begin to deliver. If you like to do word studies, look up and study the word begin in that verse. And 52 times out of the 141 times it's translated begin. But then let's look at the other ways that word is translated. It's a very unusual word. It's things and means things like pierce or wound or slay. Same word that's translated begin. And you can look it up and see all the different usages of it. And it's almost like the word, and I believe, of course, very intentional, was chosen. He'll begin to deliver Israel out of the hand of the Philistines. But the message is like, it's going to be a messy deliverance. It's going to be rough. There's going to be some bloodshed and all those sort of things. And if you know the life of Samson, guess what? It was, wasn't it? And so it's tied into just an unusual word. And the word for deliver is different than we used earlier. It's the idea he's going to save and rescue and give victory to Israel. It's just the beginning of that, out of the hand of the Philistines. This is going to take some time. This is going to be years from this point that this begins to take place and to happen. Some of y'all are familiar with the Calvin and Hobbes comic strip, and one of them along the way in school, Calvin is listening a little bit anyway. His teacher asks, as he raises his hand, do you have a question, Calvin? He seemed surprised that maybe he would. And he said this, yes. He says, what assurance do I have that this education is adequately preparing me for life in the 21st century? He goes on, he stands up, he says, am I getting the skills I'll need to compete effectively in a tough global economy? And then he clenches his fist in the little cartoon strip and he says, I want a high-paying job when I get out of here. I want opportunity. I want success. So Mrs. Wormwood approaches the desk and looks at him and says, well, in that case, young man, I suggest you start working harder. What you get out of school depends upon what you put into it. And he said, then forget it. Just forget it. I don't want that. That's too much. Thankfully, not every child's like that. But you wonder about a child sometimes, don't you? I guess years I've been in ministry, I think about that more when I go to see a family and they've had a new baby, and I I look at that little one and I think a lot of things, just the miracle of life, just incredible. And I think and I wish in some ways I would know, it's probably good that I don't, but I wish sometimes I know, God, what's the future going to look like? What's this child going to do? As they grow up, man, woman, what are they going to face? How are you going to use them? You just think about potential, and for them, and hearing a lot of these things about this Nazirite vow. You can read in Numbers chapter 6, I believe it is. You can read the whole thing about the law of the Nazirite in Numbers chapter 6. It ends with the priestly blessing that we may be more familiar with, but it talks about all the different kind of qualifications that come with this particular vow. Now, it's different than most. What we see here is different, but if you look at number 6, if you go through it sometime, the idea any man or woman could take a vow of separation. The vow was voluntary, had a limited duration, included the abstinence from wine, strong drink, or any of those sort of things. Not cutting the hair, no contact with the dead. A Nazirite would become unclean if they went through, any of those sort of issues. If they broke that, there was just an elaborate cleansing ritual process they had to go through and deal with. But if you think of Samson's life, he didn't take the vow voluntarily. It's from the womb, right? His is different. His service was not for a particular duration, it was meant for a lifetime. And then third, we know, if you know the rest of the story, which we'll talk about in these weeks to come, he eventually broke every one of the stipulations. So his is different than what most would have been because he was meant to be different in so many respects and ways. God set him apart, but I believe, and you could argue, God sets everyone apart. We just make some choices whether or not we fulfill what he's created us to be and to do or not. But notice as well as he talks about this, and the message is given to, basically be careful. It means to, some translations say beware or give heed. For those who were there Monday night, we were talking about guard your heart. That's the word, to keep or guard in the midst of this. To be careful, to keep or guard, that you don't do those certain things that he mentions to begin with, and then make sure your child doesn't do it. So it's kind of interesting. I was thinking about how to process that, and the idea of, it's not just for him to go through, it's for her to go through, that she does not partake in those things, that she lives a particular way. And I guess the idea, have you ever seen, in particular, you think of a lady, you could, maybe a couple, but the lady that's carrying the child, they're expecting a child, and you ever seen a lady that's like that and expecting, what you're expecting, don't dare ask, but you just kind of know, because if you're wrong, you don't want to go down that road. So just wisdom, don't go there. Don't dare ask. But you see the lady that's expecting, but you see her doing some things she probably shouldn't be doing, and you ever had the thought, well, doesn't she realize that she's carrying a baby? And this stuff will affect the baby. You ever had that thought? We probably all have. But what about when the baby's born, he or she's growing up? Shouldn't as parents we really feel the same way? Don't we realize that child is ours, and all we do affect the child? I mean, shouldn't we think that? And that's neat. That's kind of what's laid out for Noah's wife, at least here, in the message that's given. But we need to think about those things sometimes. So what's the plan? What does God have in store for any child? Well, we see there's intention, there's purpose, there's understanding. God creates us all special, unique, set apart, and there's just most unlimited possibilities to a degree. We can't do just anything and everything. That's reality. The American dream is great till you realize, well, I really can't do just anything and everything. I'm not created. I'm not gifted like that. But there's possibilities and there's potential everywhere. But here's what we also know when we look at that newborn child. We know they're born into sin. They're bent towards sin. They're born into sin. They're going to do some things sinful because that's just us. You wonder where their road's going to take them and what's going to come of that. But of course, we're sinners too. And we need to keep those things in mind. You think of Samson in his life, and it's a little bit like a prodigal. Wouldn't you say? He was certainly a work. He had a lot of issues. He had some weaknesses. He had some struggles that he had to try to figure out. And he probably didn't until the very end. But I was reading this story to kind of help us think about like a child and the struggles and response and so forth. Philip Yancey's book, What's So Amazing About Grace. Some of you have probably read it, and if so, you may be familiar with the story. He talks about a prodigal daughter who grew up in Traverse City, Michigan. She's disgusted with her old-fashioned parents. She believes overreact to everything. The way she looks, the music she listens to, the length of her skirts. And so she gets frustrated and she just runs away. She ends up in Detroit, where she meets a man who drives the biggest car she's ever seen. She calls him Boss. But when Boss saw her, he recognized that since she was underage, men would pay a premium for her. And so this becomes her lifestyle. She goes to work for him. In a way, at least in her thinking, things seem good for a while. At least no one's trying to get her to change. But then she gets sick for a few days and for a while, and it's a struggle, and it's amazing how mean all of a sudden Boss becomes to her when she can't do what she was doing, at least for a little bit. Before she know it, she's out on the street without a penny to her name. She would still try to do what she was doing to make some money to kind of help her drug habit, but she was struggling. One night, while trying to sleep on the metal grates of the city, she began to feel less like a woman of the world and more like a little girl. She begins to whimper, God, why did I leave? My dog back home eats better than I do now. She realizes that more than anything in the world, she wants to go home. Listen to this story. 3 straight calls home, and she gets the answering machines 3 straight times. I don't know the time frame of it, but you're probably like us. If you don't know the number, you're probably not picking up, right? And so that was her thought. And so on the 3rd time when she called, she finally decided she'd leave a message. And she simply said, Mom, Dad, it's me. I was wondering about maybe coming home. I'm catching a bus up your way, and it'll get there about midnight tomorrow. If you're not there, I'll understand. During the 7-hour bus ride, she's preparing a speech, and particularly for her father. And when the bus comes to a stop at the Traverse City station, the driver announces it's a 15-minute stop for those that are getting off to get off, and then they would proceed. And the story goes it was 15 minutes for her to kind of decide her life, what she's going to do. She walks into the terminal not knowing what to expect, but not one of the 1,000 scenes that have played out in her mind prepares her for what she sees. There in that bus terminal stands a group of 40 brothers and sisters, aunts and uncles, cousins, a grandmother, and even a great-grandmother. They're all wearing party hats and blowing noisemakers, and taped across the wall of the terminal is a big welcome home banner. Out of the crowd of well-wishers, She sees her dad break through, and she's been rehearsing the speech. Y'all ever been there, rehearsing it in her mind, what she's going to say. Tears just fill her eyes, and she starts her speech, and he just stops her and interrupts and says, "Hush, child, we've got no time for that. No time for apologies. We'll be late. There's a big party waiting on you at home." None of us are perfect. None of us get it all right. Samson's no different. Gideon's no different. Any of those we talked about in his family or see in the list of people that we come across along the way, none are perfect. None get it all right. Mistakes are made along the way for all of us. But isn't it neat that God can turn messes into masterpieces? Now, it may take some time. It may take a while, a little longer than maybe we hope or maybe we think. But the next time you see a newborn, think about, Lord, what you got for that child? What's your plan? What's your dream? What's your purpose? Sometimes it's different than ours. If you have children when you're real young, you're not always thinking about that per se, but as we go along and as we start processing more and more, we realize, okay, God, this is really more about you than about me. It's about your plan, not my plan, your purpose, not my purpose. And I just happen to believe every one is set apart. Every one. Special, intentional, purposeful. And I think if we can get children and youth and even a few adults we probably know to see that, it would change lives. Not an accident, not a mistake, not a burden, a gift that God could use for His glory. Let's pray together. Father, tonight, thank you as we begin a study on a man that we think of as just being so strong, Superman in a way, that you set him apart from the very beginning for something greater than his mom or dad or anybody else would have ever imagined. And God, I pray that you would help us to look at those newborns that we get to see from time to time, the children that walk through the halls of this church, the youth that are out tonight enjoying some time at the pit and just being outdoors and hearing a lesson and a message from you. And Lord, just to look at them through your eyes. Lord, it's easy for us, I know it's easy for me, to see what we do wrong. But Lord, remind us that you can forgive and you can help make us right. And that's true for them too. And so, Lord, I pray that as we think about your plan and purpose for us, that they'll think about your plan and purpose for them. And they realize it's bigger than really we could ever dream. And so, Lord, work your will and way in their lives. God, help us to celebrate what we see and witness as decisions are made for you and sin is overcome and struggles are eliminated. And Lord, that we could just celebrate the good things. And Lord, I pray that you would help us to learn all through the process. But Lord, thank you for gifting us, setting us apart in different ways to do different things. And Lord, I pray that all that we do would honor you as we use those gifts. Bless us as we study more and more about Samson and that life. And Lord, to just have a better understanding of what you've called us to and the steps in the journey to get us there and how important they are. But bless, we pray, and again, thank you always for Jesus in his name. Amen.